Hey guys! Tonight we're stepping into a world where silence reigns and candlelight flickers against cold stone walls. You're standing in the dim glow of a medieval monastery, the air thick with incense and the quiet murmur of Latin prayers echoing through vaulted halls. Outside, the night is deep and black, stretching endlessly beyond the heavy wooden doors. Inside, monks in ruffle robes shuffle barefoot across the floor, their eyes tired but determined. It's the middle of the night, yes, middle, and they're not sleeping. They never do. Instead, they're preparing for another round of prayer, another vigil, another long stretch of devotion that would break most modern souls before sunrise. You probably won't survive this. The rules here are strict. No unnecessary speech, no luxuries, and definitely no coffee. But there is one loophole, a golden, frothy loophole called beer. Yes, beer. Not wine, not water, but beer. And not just any beer, either. This is liquid sustenance, brewed under the watchful eye of holy men who believed it was better than bread, safer than well water, and spiritually sanctioned by centuries of tradition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Wherever you are, wherever your time zone lands you tonight, imagine yourself slipping into this world. Maybe you're curled up under blankets. Maybe you're sprawled on the couch with a fan humming softly in the background. Either way, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Now, picture yourself standing beside a monk as he lifts a wooden ladle from a bubbling cauldron. The scent is earthy, warm, slightly sweet. He takes a careful sip, nods approvingly, and passes it to his brother. This isn't just a drink, it's survival. In a world without artificial lighting, without caffeine, and without central heating, beer became the monk's secret weapon, a tool to stay awake during endless vigils, a source of nutrition when food was scarce, and sometimes the only thing keeping them sane. So step closer. Feel the heat of the fire on your skin. Smell the malted barley roasting nearby. Listen closely, because tonight we're brewing history. You trudge behind the monks as they shuffle barefoot through the cloister, the cold stone floor sending a shiver up your spine. It's still dark, so dark that even the stars seem to be holding their breath. The only light comes from flickering oil lamps and the faint glow of dawn beginning to creep over the horizon like an afterthought. You glance around the brothers, their hoods drawn low, their faces etched with exhaustion. This is not a gentle morning wake-up call. It's a brutal return to duty. No snooze buttons here. No alarms blaring from smartphones. Just the toll of a bell and the weight of divine obligation pulling them from their narrow cots. The day begins with prayer, of course. What else? But before they can kneel in the chapel, there are chores to do. Water must be fetched from the well. Bread needs baking. And the brewery must be prepped for another round of brewing. Yes, brewing. Because even in this world of rigid discipline and self-denial, beer remains a necessity, not a luxury. And today you're helping. You follow Brother Anselm into the brew house, a modest stone building tucked between the kitchen and the storage cellars. The scent of yesterday's mash still lingers in the air, thick and slightly sour. He gestures toward a stack of wooden pails and nods. You grab one and head outside to help draw water from the well, your breath visible in the crisp morning air. Every drop counts. This isn't just for drinking or washing. It's the foundation of tonight's beer. Back inside, you watch as the monks begin heating the water in a massive copper cauldron. They toss in crushed, malted barley, stirring carefully with long wooden paddles. The grains hiss and swirl, releasing a warm, nutty aroma that fills the small room. There's something almost comforting about it, despite the early hour. This is more than just brewing. It's ritual, a sacred act performed with the same reverence as reading scripture. As the mixture thickens, Brother Anselm dips a ladle into the pot and offers you a taste. It's sweet, almost syrupy, with hints of caramel and toast. Mash, he murmurs, the heart of the beer. You nod, swallowing slowly, already feeling the warmth settle in your stomach. Outside, the sky is brightening now, streaked with hues of pink and gold. The bells will ring soon, calling the monks back to prayer. But before that happens, before the day fully begins, there's one last step. You'll need to strain the mash, separate the liquid wort, and prepare it for boiling. And trust me, you'll want to be wide awake for what comes next. You step into the granary, your boots crunching softly against the stone floor. The air is thick with the scent of grain, earthy, slightly sweet, and tinged with something almost like honey. Barrels line the walls, their wooden lids sealed tight to keep out damp and vermin. Stacks of sacks bulge with barley, wheat, and rye, each one a promise of sustenance, of bread, and yes, of beer. This is where it all begins, long before the mash tun or the boiling kettle. Without these grains, there would be no monastery, no beer, and certainly no way for the monks to survive their endless vigils without slipping into exhausted unconsciousness. Brother Anselm gestures toward a sack near the far wall. "Malted barley," he says simply, tapping the coarse fabric with his knuckles. You reach down and lift the flap, peering inside at the golden brown kernels nestled within. They look harmless enough, but you know better. These are the foundation of everything that happens in the brew house. Without them, the monks wouldn't have the energy to chant their psalms through the night, nor the strength to endure the long hours of labor that define monastic life. You run your fingers through the grains, feeling their rough texture, their dry weight. Malting is an art, not just a process. It begins with soaking the raw barley in water until it swells and begins to sprout. Then comes the careful drying, a delicate balance between heat and time. Too much fire, and the grain burns, losing its precious sugars. Too little, and it remains soft, vulnerable to mold. The monks have perfected this over generations, passing down their knowledge like sacred scripture. You glance around the granary, taking in the quiet efficiency of the space. Every barrel has its place, every bag its purpose. Some hold unmalted grain, reserved for bread making or animal feed. Others contain dried hops, though those are rare and expensive. Most monasteries still rely on herbs like yarrow, ground ivy, or even bog myrtle to flavor their beer. Hops may be gaining popularity, but old traditions die hard. Historians still argue whether early medieval brewers fully understood the preservative power of hops, or if they were simply drawn to the bitter taste as a counterbalance to the sweetness of malted barley. Either way, the debate continues, just like the brewing itself. You pick up a handful of malted barley and let it spill through your fingers like golden sand. There's something oddly satisfying about it. The weight of history in your hands, the unbroken chain stretching back centuries. These same grains fueled the prayers of men who spent entire nights on their knees, who built towering cathedrals with their bare hands, who carved out a place for themselves in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. A distant bell rings, sharp and clear against the morning silence. Brother Anselm turns, already heading for the door. "Come," he says, "we must move." You follow him back toward the brew house, the sack of malt slung over your shoulder. The day is moving forward, and so must you. There's still work to do, boiling to prepare, fermentation to oversee, and plenty more beer to make before the next vigil begins. You stand beside the great copper cauldron, steam rising in ghostly tendrils around your face as Brother Anselm stirs the thickening mash with a long wooden paddle. The scent is rich and intoxicating, nutty, slightly sweet, with a hint of toasted bread that makes your stomach rumble despite yourself. This is where the magic begins, where grain meets water and heat to transform into something entirely new. The monks call it the mash, though you're not sure if that's Latin for alchemy or just their way of describing the slow, careful process unfolding before you. You dip your ladle into the bubbling mixture and lift it to your lips. It's warm, syrupy, and unexpectedly pleasant. Not quite beer yet, but definitely on its way. This liquid gold, known as wort, will soon be boiled, flavored, and fermented into the drink that keeps these men awake through endless nights of prayer. Brother Anselm gestures toward a second cauldron, already filled with fresh water and warming over the fire. "We must keep moving," he murmurs, his voice low but urgent. You nod and follow his lead, lifting a heavy wooden bucket filled with yesterday's soaked grains and pouring them into the waiting pot. The monks work quickly, methodically, their hands moving with the ease of those who have done this hundreds, perhaps thousands of times before. Heat is crucial here. Too little, and enzymes in the malt won't convert the starches into fermentable sugars. Too much, and the whole batch could be ruined. It's a delicate balance, one that requires patience, precision, and more than a little faith. You watch as the monks adjust the fire beneath the cauldron, feeding it with small twigs and dry straw, carefully regulating the temperature like seasoned alchemists coaxing gold from lead. A quirky fact lingers at the edge of your mind, one that would make any modern brewer raise an eyebrow. Some medieval monasteries used to bury their mash tuns underground to maintain a steady temperature. Yes, you heard that right. They dug holes in the floor, lined them with stone, and let the earth itself regulate the warmth of their brewing process. Imagine that beer brewed in the ground like some kind of ancient fermentation cellar. As the mash thickens, Brother Anselm reaches for a small clay jar tucked away on a nearby shelf. He uncorks it carefully and offers it to you. Inside is a fine powder, ground coriander seeds. For flavor, he explains, you take a cautious sniff. It's sharp, citrusy, with a faint peppery note that tingles your nose. Coriander isn't exactly what you'd expect in a medieval monastery spice cabinet. But then again, nothing about this place has been ordinary so far. You sprinkle a pinch into the pot, watching as the monks do the same. Some add crushed juniper berries, others toss in dried rosemary or even powdered ginger, an expensive luxury imported from distant lands. These aren't just flavorings. They're symbols of the monastery's wealth, its connections, and sometimes its desperation. In lean years, when hops were scarce or too costly, monks turned to whatever herbs they had on hand to preserve their beer and give it character. The air inside the brew house grows thick with the mingling scents of grain, spice, and firewood. Outside, the morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The bells will ring soon, calling the brothers back to chapel. But there's still time, just enough to finish straining the mash before the next round of prayers. Brother Anselm dips a wooden scoop into the cauldron and lifts it high, letting the golden liquid drip back down in slow, viscous streams. Good, he says simply. You agree. Whatever comes next, you know one thing for certain. The beer is coming along nicely. The wort is ready, and now comes the true test of the brewer's skill. Brother Anselm lifts a ladleful of the thick, golden liquid and lets it drip back into the cauldron, watching its slow, syrupy descent with a practiced eye. He nods once, satisfied, and gestures toward the fire. We boil, he says simply. You follow him as he stokes the flames beneath a second, larger copper kettle, already blackened from years of use. Sparks dance in the air as fresh logs crackle and pop, sending up a steady heat that makes sweat bead on your brow despite the morning chill outside. This is where the beer begins to change, where flavors deepen, bitterness emerges, and preservation begins. Brother Anselm grabs a bundle of dried herbs hanging from a wooden beam and snaps off a few sprigs. You recognize them instantly. Yarrow, with its feathery leaves and faintly bitter aroma. Some monasteries still rely on this ancient flavoring, though others have begun experimenting with something newer, something foreign: hops. Historians still argue whether medieval brewers fully understood the preservative power of hops, or if they were simply drawn to its sharp bitterness as a counterbalance to the sweetness of malted barley. Either way, the debate continues just like the brewing itself. Slow, deliberate, and filled with tradition. A younger monk steps forward, holding a small cloth pouch sealed with wax. He opens it carefully, revealing tightly packed cones of dried hops, their greenish-yellow hue standing out against the deep brown of the mash. These are valuable, more expensive than yarrow, more difficult to obtain, but increasingly favored by monastic brewers for their ability to extend the shelf life of beer. The monks aren't scientists, but they've observed over time that beers brewed with hops last longer without spoiling, making them ideal for storage through long winters and lean harvests. Brother Anselm takes a handful and tosses it into the bubbling wort. The scent that rises is sharp, almost floral at first, then quickly giving way to a resinous bitterness that clings to the inside of your nose. It's an acquired taste, one that not every monastery has embraced yet. Some still stick to traditional grit blends, a mix of herbs including bog myrtle, wild rosemary, and even ground ivy, depending on what grows nearby. Others have started blending both, using hops sparingly while keeping familiar flavors alive. There's a quiet tension in the air as the monks work, stirring the boiling mixture with long wooden paddles, careful not to let it scorch along the edges. The fire must be maintained at just the right intensity. Too hot, and the delicate balance of sugars and oils will burn away. Too cool, and the wort won't extract the full strength of the hops or herbs. You dip your own ladle into the pot and take a cautious sip. The difference is immediate. The richness of the malt has been sharpened, cut through by the assertive bite of the boiled herbs. It's stronger now, bolder, more complex. This is no longer just sustenance, it's identity. Every monastery has its own recipe, its own secret blend passed down through generations. Some favor a gentler touch, others embrace bold bitterness, each one reflecting the character of the men who brew it. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling the next round of prayers. But here in the brew house, time moves differently. The monks continue their work, undeterred by the call to chapel. There will be time for devotion later. For now, there is only the beer, the fire, and the quiet certainty that what they're doing matters more than most people realize. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern brewers chuckle. Some medieval monasteries used to throw in random bits of whatever was handy when brewing. Crushed oyster shells for clarity, ash from burned wood to adjust pH, even powdered deer antler for reasons nobody quite remembers. Yes, you read that right. Medieval beer was sometimes dosed with crushed animal parts because apparently nobody had told them about food safety regulations yet. You shake your head, amused, as Brother Anselm reaches for another bundle of herbs. The wort is nearly done, but there's still one final step before fermentation can begin. They'll need to cool it down, strain it, and prepare it for the yeast, the invisible force that will transform this bitter, boiling liquid into something drinkable, something sacred. And that, dear listener, is where things get truly interesting. The wort is cooling now, its once boiling surface settling into a gentle shimmer as the monks pour it into wide wooden troughs. The air inside the brew house shifts, thicker, heavier, charged with something unseen but deeply felt. This is the moment where science and superstition blur, where knowledge gives way to mystery. You lean over the edge of the trough, watching as steam curls upward in lazy spirals, carrying with it the sharp bitterness of hops and the lingering warmth of malted barley. Brother Anselm stands beside you, silent for a moment before dipping his fingers into the liquid and flicking a few droplets into the air. "It must cool," he murmurs, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. "Too hot and the yeast will die. Too cold, and it will sleep forever." He gestures toward a nearby shelf where small clay vessels sit neatly arranged, each one sealed with wax or cloth. Inside, lies the secret ingredient, the invisible force that will transform this bitter wort into beer. Yeast, or at least what they believe to be divine intervention. You watch as Brother Anselm selects one of the vessels and uncorks it carefully. He tilts it slightly, letting a few drops fall onto his fingertip before rubbing them together thoughtfully. It looks like nothing more than murky water, but you know better. This is the heart of fermentation, the catalyst that turns sweet wort into something altogether different. Without it, there is no beer, only a warm, vaguely sweet broth that would spoil within days. But medieval monks don't understand yeast, not in the way modern brewers do. They don't know about microscopic organisms, about Saccharomyces cerevisiae, about the precise chemical reactions that convert sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. All they know is that when they add this mysterious substance to their cooled wort, something happens, something holy. Historians still argue whether medieval brewers believed fermentation was the work of God or simply a natural process they had learned to harness. Some monastic records refer to the yeast as God's gift, while others describe it more pragmatically, treating it like any other ingredient in the brewing process. Either way, the monks treat it with reverence, carefully saving portions of each successful batch to use in the next. Quirky fact lingers at the edges of your mind, one that would make modern microbiologists shudder. Some medieval breweries didn't even bother isolating their yeast cultures. Instead, they left open vats of wort outside overnight, allowing wild yeasts from the air to drift in and begin fermentation naturally. Yes, really, beer brewed by chance, by the whims of wind and weather, by whatever microbes happen to land in the pot first. That's right, your favorite ale might have been born from airborne fungus blowing off a goat's hoof somewhere in the countryside. Back in the brew house, the monks are already moving. They lift heavy ladles, scooping the cooled wort from the troughs and pouring it into waiting wooden casks. The scent changes again, subtler now, earthy and faintly sour, tinged with the promise of something stronger. Brother Anselm takes his prepared yeast mixture and pours it slowly into the largest cask, stirring gently with a wooden paddle. "Now we wait," he says simply, and wait they do. For days, sometimes weeks, the casks sit in the cool darkness of the monastery cellar, untouched except for the occasional check. There's no rushing this part. No amount of prayer or labor can speed up fermentation. It must unfold on its own time in its own way. Outside, the bells ring again, signaling yet another round of prayers. But here in the cellar, time moves differently. The monks light a single oil lamp, casting long shadows across the stone walls, and leave the casks to their quiet transformation. As you step back into the corridor, the weight of history settles around you like a cloak. Somewhere behind those wooden lids, tiny, invisible creatures are hard at work, turning sugar into alcohol, changing the course of monastic life one bubbling drop at a time. And tomorrow, when the monks gather once more in the chapel, they won't just be drinking beer. They'll be tasting the hand of God. The refectory is quiet tonight, its vaulted ceiling swallowing the soft clatter of wooden bowls and spoons. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting long shadows across the stone walls as monks sit in solemn silence, breaking their fast with bread, cheese, and, of course, beer. But tonight, there's something different on the table. A second jug sits beside the usual brew, its contents darker, thicker, and unmistakably sweet. Mead, the golden nectar of kings and poets, made not from malted grain, but from honey, water, and time. You take a seat at the long wooden table, watching as Brother Anselm pours himself a modest cup of beer before reaching for the mead jug. He hesitates, glancing toward the abbot seated at the far end of the hall, then dips his ladle into the amber liquid anyway. You follow suit, filling your own cup and lifting it to your lips. The difference is immediate. The mead is rich, almost syrupy, with a floral sweetness that lingers on your tongue. It's nothing like the crisp bitterness of the monastery's usual beer, and yet it belongs here just the same. Mead has always held a special place in monastic life. Older than beer, older than even the written word, it was once considered the drink of gods and warriors. Some monks still prefer it, especially during feast days or when entertaining important guests. It's more expensive to make. Honey isn't cheap, after all, but it carries an air of luxury that simple barley beer never could. Brother Anselm sets his cup down with a thoughtful sigh. Beer feeds the body, he murmurs, but mead feeds the soul. You raise an eyebrow. That seems like a stretch, considering how many hours these men spend praying on their knees rather than feasting. Still, you can't deny the allure of the stuff. Mead is softer, gentler, easier to drink, easier to enjoy. Beer, on the other hand, is practical, reliable. It keeps longer, it's cheaper to make, and it provides the steady energy needed to survive endless nights of vigil. Historians still argue whether medieval monasteries brewed both drinks out of necessity or indulgence. Some records suggest that mead was reserved for special occasions, while others show evidence of regular production alongside beer. Either way, the two coexisted in monastic cellars for centuries, each serving its own purpose. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern bartenders raise an eyebrow. Some medieval monks believed mead had medicinal properties, particularly when infused with herbs or spices. They prescribed it for everything from sore throats to melancholy, convinced that honey carried healing powers beyond mere sustenance. In fact, some monastic infirmaries kept special stocks of spiced mead on hand, doling it out to sick brothers as both comfort and cure. Back in the refectory, the meal continues in silence, broken only by the occasional creak of benches or the soft scrape of spoons against wooden bowls. You glance around at the gathered monks, noting which ones reach for the mead and which stick strictly to beer. Most seem indifferent, drinking what's poured without complaint. But a few, young novices perhaps, or aging brothers who remember better years, take an extra sip, savoring the moment before returning to their bread. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling the end of the meal and the beginning of another round of prayers. The monks rise in unison, pushing back their stools and folding their hands in silent reverence. Brother Anselm gives you a knowing look before turning toward the chapel, leaving you alone with the last drops of mead in your cup. You finish them slowly, letting the warmth settle in your chest before rising to follow the others. There's work to do, brewing to continue, and plenty more history waiting in the cellar. But for now, you carry the taste of honey and tradition with you, a reminder that even in the strictest of monasteries, there was always room for a little sweetness. The Rule of St. Benedict lies open before you, its pages worn and slightly smudged from years of careful handling. You run your fingers over the inked Latin script, tracing the elegant letters as Brother Anselm stands beside you, watching in silence. This is no ordinary book. It's the foundation of monastic life, a blueprint for discipline, devotion, and, surprisingly enough, beer consumption. You clear your throat and begin reading aloud, translating the words as best you can. Therefore, let all heed what is written. Do not be drunk with wine. For drunkenness is the destruction of the soul. But if anyone cannot be satisfied with this one vice, let him know that there is no excuse before God. You pause, raising an eyebrow at Brother Anselm. So, moderation? He chuckles softly, shaking his head. Yes, but also permission. He taps a line further down the page. You follow his finger, squinting at the faded ink until the meaning clicks into place. Let each receive daily a hemina of wine, whether young or old. Let the abbot consider whether each one may have more, lest perhaps he find excess harmful to any. A hemina, that's about half a liter of beer, per day, for every monk. You glance up, stunned. That's like what, nearly a pint? Every single day. Brother Anselm shrugs. It is not luxury, it is sustenance. And he's right. In a world where clean water was scarce, where malnutrition was common, and where monks were expected to endure long hours of prayer and labor without complaint, beer wasn't just a drink, it was survival. It provided calories, hydration, and even some essential nutrients. Plus, given the brewing process, it was far safer to drink than most well water, which could easily carry disease. Historians still argue whether medieval monks truly drank half a liter of beer every day, or if the rule was more of a guideline than a strict limit. Some records suggest that younger novices received less, while older brothers or those engaged in heavy manual labor might get more. Others point out that the strength of the beer varied. Some brews were light and barely alcoholic, little more than liquid bread, while others were stronger and reserved for special occasions or times of illness. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern drinkers raise an eyebrow. Some monasteries brewed different strengths of beer depending on the time of year. During winter, when food was scarcer and energy demand higher, they made stronger, more caloric beers to keep the brothers warm and nourished. In summer, lighter brews took their place, easier to drink in the heat and less likely to cause drowsiness during long days of work. You close the Rule of St. Benedict carefully, running your thumb along the leather-bound spine. It's strange to think that something so rigid, so focused on self-denial and discipline, would include such a specific allowance for beer. But then again, maybe that's the point. Monastic life wasn't meant to be easy, but neither was it meant to be impossible. The rules weren't about indulgence, they were about balance. And sometimes balance meant a daily ration of beer. Brother Anselm gives you a knowing look. Come, he says simply, there is still much to do. You rise from the wooden bench, tucking the rulebook back onto its shelf. Outside, the bells ring again, signaling yet another round of prayers. But here in the scriptorium, history lingers in the air like the scent of hops and malt. And as you step back into the corridor, you carry with you the knowledge that even the strictest of rules had room for a little liquid sustenance. The monastery gates creak open with a groan of ancient iron hinges, and outside, a line of weary travelers stands waiting. Their cloaks are dusted with road grime. their boots worn from miles of walking, and their eyes, those that aren't already half closed from exhaustion, glance toward the inner courtyard with something between hope and desperation. These are pilgrims making their way to distant holy sites, seeking shelter for the night and perhaps a warm meal before they continue their journey at dawn. And tonight, as always, they will be greeted not just with bread and water, but with beer. You follow Brother Anselm across the stone-paved yard, stepping carefully around puddles left behind by this morning's rain. The guest house is already bustling with activity. Servants stoke fires in the hearth, maids lay out wooden bowls and spoons, and a pair of monks carry fresh loaves of rye bread from the kitchen. But it's the barrels near the entrance that draw your attention most. Stacked neatly beside the doorway, they bear the unmistakable scent of hops and barley, and you know without asking what awaits inside. Pilgrims were among the greatest beneficiaries of monastic brewing. In an age when long-distance travel was slow, dangerous, and often punishingly uncomfortable, monasteries served as crucial sanctuaries along the roads. They offered food, shelter, and spiritual guidance, and yes, sometimes even beer. Not just any beer, either. Travelers were often given stronger brews than the monks themselves drank, both as a gesture of hospitality and because the alcohol content helped preserve the drink longer. After all, a tired pilgrim needed more than just hydration. He needed sustenance, warmth, and maybe a little courage for the days ahead. Historians still argue whether medieval inns and taverns brewed their own beer or simply purchased it from nearby monasteries. Some records suggest that certain abbeys had contracts with roadside establishments, supplying them with barrels in exchange for coin or goods. Others indicate that monks brewed specifically for travelers staying within their own walls, offering it freely as part of their religious duty to care for the poor and the weary. Either way, one thing is clear. If you were lucky enough to find yourself knocking on a monastery door after a long day's walk, there was a good chance you'd be drinking better than you had in weeks. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern hostel owners raise an eyebrow. Some monasteries actually brewed different strengths of beer depending on a traveler's status. Wealthier guests might receive spiced or honey-infused brews, while common folk got something simpler but still nourishing. It wasn't exactly discrimination, it was practicality. Monastic resources were limited, and while charity was encouraged, monks also had to ensure they had enough supplies to last through the winter. Back in the guest house, the first batch of pilgrims has already been seated at long wooden tables, their hands wrapped around steaming cups of broth and thick slices of bread set before them. A younger monk steps forward with a ladle and begins filling cups from a nearby barrel. The scent of warm malt and roasted barley fills the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of stew simmering over the fire. One of the travelers lifts his cup cautiously, sniffing before taking a careful sip. His face lights up instantly. "By God," he mutters, "this is better than anything I've had since leaving Paris." Brother Anselm chuckles beside you. "Beer travels well," he says simply, "and it keeps the body warm when the night turns cold." You watch as more travelers file in, their shoulders slumping slightly as they finally allow themselves to relax. Some are silent, too exhausted for conversation, while others begin murmuring among themselves, sharing stories of the road, of saints seen and miracles witnessed. You wonder how many of them will remember this place, not for its prayers or its chapel, but for the warmth of a cup filled to the brim with something strong and sweet and utterly welcome. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling the next round of prayers. But here, in the guest house, time moves differently. For these travelers, The only thing that matters right now is the meal before them and the promise of rest. And as you glance down at your own cup, steam rising gently into the cool evening air, you realize something important. Beer was never just about survival. Sometimes it was about kindness, too. The infirmary is quiet tonight, its stone walls absorbing the soft murmurs of prayer and the occasional rustle of a shifting patient. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting long shadows over rows of narrow beds where sick monks lie wrapped in woolen blankets. The scent of herbs lingers in the air. Thyme, sage, rosemary, mingling with something sharper, something more familiar. Beer, not the usual monastery brew, but something different, something stronger. You stand beside Brother Anselm as he lifts a wooden ladle from a waiting basin, swirling the thick, amber liquid thoughtfully before dipping his fingers into it. He smells it first, then tastes a drop on his tongue, nodding in approval. "Good," he murmurs. "It will do." This is no ordinary beer. It's a medicinal draught, brewed specifically for the sick and the suffering. Some call it aqua vitae, the water of life, though you know better, it's still beer, just infused with healing herbs and spices believed to soothe ailments ranging from fever to melancholy. In a world without modern medicine, this was often the best treatment available. You glance around the infirmary, noting how the brothers move with careful precision, measuring out doses and offering cups to those too weak to lift them themselves. A younger monk coughs weakly into his sleeve, his face pale and drawn. But when he takes a sip of the beer, his shoulders relax slightly, his breathing steadies. It may not cure him, but it helps. Historians still argue whether medieval monastic beer was truly medicinal or if its use in infirmaries was more about comfort than actual healing. Some records suggest that certain abbeys kept detailed notes on which herbal blends worked best for specific illnesses, while others imply that beer was simply the only safe drink available. And if it made patients feel better, even temporarily, then so be it. Either way, it was a staple of monastic care for centuries. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern pharmacists raise an eyebrow. Some medieval infirmaries added crushed gemstones or powdered animal parts to their medicinal beers. Yes, really. Gold dust for fevers, ground pearls for headaches, even deer antler shavings for strength. Whether these actually helped or were just symbolic gestures meant to inspire faith in the cure, nobody can say for sure. But hey, at least it wasn't crocodile dung sunscreen. Back in the infirmary, Brother Anselm hands you a cup filled with the same amber brew. You hesitate for a moment, then bring it to your lips and take a cautious sip. It's rich and slightly bitter, with a lingering warmth that spreads through your chest. There's a sharp note of ginger beneath the malt, along with something earthy, perhaps sage or yarrow. It's not unpleasant, though you doubt it would win any awards at a modern beer festival. Still, you can see why the monks relied on it. You watch as another brother approaches a bedridden patient, lifting his head gently and offering a spoonful of the mixture. The man swallows slowly, his eyes fluttering open for just a moment before drifting shut again. Whether it's the beer or sheer exhaustion pulling him under, you can't tell. But at least he seems more at peace now. Brother Anselm sighs softly, setting down the ladle. In times like these, he says quietly, beer is more than food, more than drink. It is solace. You nod, taking another sip. He's right. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about comfort, about easing pain when there are no other options left. And in a place like this, where illness runs rampant and cures are scarce, sometimes all you can offer someone is warmth, nourishment, and a little bit of hope in a wooden cup. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling yet another round of prayers. But here in the infirmary, time moves differently. The monks continue their work, tending to the sick, offering what little relief they can. And as you set your cup down beside the basin, you realize something important. Beer may have been born out of necessity, but it grew into something far greater. Sometimes it was medicine, too. The convent gates creak open just as the monasteries did, and yet something feels different. The air is quieter here, the footsteps softer, the voices more measured. You follow Sister Beatrice through the cloistered courtyard, her white wimple fluttering slightly in the evening breeze. She moves with quiet purpose, leading you past neatly kept gardens where lavender and sage grow in tidy rows. These aren't just for decoration. Many of them will end up in the brewing vats. You glance around, noting how much smaller this place is compared to the bustling monasteries you visited before. There are fewer brothers here, only sisters. And yet, despite its size, this convent has been brewing beer for centuries. Not mead, not wine, but beer. Strong, nourishing, and sometimes even spiced with herbs believed to aid in healing. Sister Beatrice catches your surprised expression and smiles faintly. "You expected only monks to brew?" she asks, amusement flicked into her voice like a dash of coriander into a mashed tun. You shrug. "I guess I never really thought about it." She nods, as if she's heard that answer before. "Men wrote most of the records," she says simply, "but women brewed just the same." And she's right. While medieval history often paints brewing as a monk's domain, nuns were just as involved in the craft, if not more so. In many religious communities, brewing fell under the broader category of domestic labor, which was typically assigned to women. Whether in convents or noble households, it was often the women who managed the brewing process, ensuring that their communities had safe, nourishing drink. Historians still argue whether convent breweries operated independently or under the oversight of nearby monasteries. Some records suggest that certain abbeys supplied hops or yeast to convents, while others indicate that nuns brewed entirely on their own, developing their own recipes and techniques over time. Either way, one thing is clear. These women weren't just following recipes handed down by men. They were innovators, experimenting with flavors, perfecting fermentation techniques, and quietly shaping the course of brewing history from behind convent walls. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern brewers raise an eyebrow. Some medieval nuns were known to brew stronger beers than their male counterparts, particularly when entertaining guests or supplying pilgrims. Why? Because they could, because they knew their brews were good, and because they weren't afraid to prove it. In fact, some convents gained reputations for producing beer so fine that travelers specifically sought out their hospitality just to taste it. Back in the convent's small brewery, the scent of malt and herbs fills the air. Wooden barrels line the stone walls, each one carefully labeled with markings indicating strength, age, and ingredients. A few novices stir large cauldrons over a low fire, their hands moving with practiced ease as they check the temperature of the mash. Unlike in the monastic breweries you've seen, there's no rush here, just steady, methodical work carried out with quiet precision. Sister Beatrice gestures toward a row of drying racks where bundles of hops and yarrow hang upside down, slowly curing in the warm air. "We use what grows near us," she explains. "Sometimes we trade for hops, but we prefer our own blends." Each sister has her favorite herb. You take a step closer, inhaling deeply. The scent is earthy, slightly floral, with a sharpness that lingers at the back of your throat. It's familiar, but also different, softer somehow. "You should try it," Sister Beatrice says, already reaching for a wooden ladle. You accept the cup she offers, lifting it carefully to your lips. The first sip is smooth, slightly sweet, with a herbal undertone that lingers long after you swallow. It's unlike anything you've tasted before. Not quite like the monastery's daily ration. Not quite like the guest house ale. It's something else entirely. Something made with care. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling the next round of prayers. But here in the brewery, time moves differently. The sisters continue their work, stirring, measuring, tasting. And as you set your cup down beside the barrel, you realize something important. Beer may have been born in monasteries, but it thrived in convents too. Sometimes it was brewed by women. The road ahead is long, winding through dense forests and across rolling hills where the morning mist clings to the earth like a lingering prayer. You trudge beside Brother Anselm and his fellow monks, their woolen robes dusted with road grime, their wooden staffs tapping rhythmically against the packed dirt path. This isn't just a pilgrimage, it's a mission, a journey not only of faith, but of fermentation, carrying with them the sacred knowledge of brewing to lands that have yet to taste the fruits of monastic craftsmanship. Behind you, the monastery fades into the distance, its stone walls swallowed by the horizon. Ahead, villages rise in the valleys, their thatched rooftops peaking above fields of barley and rye. And somewhere beyond those settlements lie distant abbeys, new foundations eager for guidance, for supplies for beer. Because wherever monks go, brewing follows. It always has. Brother Anselm walks beside you, his steps steady despite the weight of the leather satchel slung over his shoulder. Inside, he carries samples, small vials of yeast cultures, dried hops, even a few wax-sealed flasks of specially brewed ale meant to survive the journey. These are more than just ingredients. They're blueprints, living fragments of tradition passed from one brotherhood to another. You glance at him, raising an eyebrow. How far are we going? He chuckles softly, adjusting the strap on his satchel. Far enough, he says simply. A new abbey waits near the Rhine. They need our knowledge. And he's right. The spread of Christianity across Europe wasn't just about preaching sermons or building churches. It was also about sustaining communities. Monastic breweries played a crucial role in this expansion, ensuring that newly founded abbeys had access to safe, nourishing drink in places where water could be dangerous and food scarce. Brewing wasn't just a trade, it was a necessity, a tool for survival, a way to bring order to the chaos of frontier life. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers actively sought to spread their craft, or if it simply followed naturally as religious orders expanded. Some records suggest that certain abbeys maintained formal brewing schools, training younger monks before sending them off to establish new foundations. Others imply that brewing knowledge was shared informally, passed along during visits between monasteries like whispered secrets carried in the folds of heavy wool robes. Either way, one thing is clear. Beer traveled alongside faith, moving steadily across Europe with every step the monks took. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern backpackers raise an eyebrow. Some medieval monks carried portable brewing kits when traveling. Yes, really. Small copper kettles, collapsible mash tuns, even compact sacks of malted grain, all packed carefully into wooden chests strapped to mules or ox carts. If they found themselves stranded for days without hospitality, they could set up a makeshift brewery almost anywhere, boiling water, fermenting wort, and keeping themselves fed and alert until they reached their destination. Back on the road, the sun climbs higher, casting golden light across the fields. You pass through a village where farmers pause their work to watch the procession pass. Children wave shyly from doorways, while elders nod respectfully at the sight of robed figures walking with purpose. Some of them recognize the signs: the scent of hops clinging to the monks' robes, the faint tang of fermentation in the air. They know what these men carry with them. A woman steps forward, offering a handful of fresh herbs to Brother Anselm. "For your brew," she says simply. He accepts them with a grateful nod, tucking them into his satchel. Every ingredient helps, especially when venturing into unfamiliar territory. As you press onward, the landscape shifts. Rolling hills give way to dense woodlands, and soon you find yourselves crossing a narrow bridge over a swift-flowing river. Brother Anselm pauses here, glancing back at the road behind you before turning to face the path ahead. His voice is quiet, almost reverent. "This is how it spreads," he murmurs. "One monastery at a time, one batch at a time." You nod, watching the water rush beneath your feet. Beer may have begun in the cloisters of old, but it didn't stay there. It moved, evolved, adapted, just like the men who brewed it. And as you take your next step forward, you realize something important. History doesn't just sit in dusty books or crumbling ruins. Sometimes it walks beside you. The debate has been brewing for decades, centuries, even, and it shows no sign of settling. You stand in the monastery's refectory, a wooden cup in your hand, listening as two monks argue over the merits of hops versus herbs with all the intensity of theologians dissecting scripture. Across the table, Brother Anselm leans forward, his voice low but firm. "Hops preserve the beer," he says. "They keep it from souring too quickly." Across from him, an older monk shakes his head. "But they change the taste," he counters. "Too bitter, too sharp. A good brew should soothe the soul, not sting the tongue." He lifts his own cup and takes a long sip, savoring the familiar warmth of yarrow and rosemary. This is what our forefathers drank. This is what God intended. You glance between them, caught in the middle of one of the great flavor wars of medieval brewing. It's easy to forget now, centuries later, that hops were once a controversial newcomer, an outsider in a world where herbal grit blends had ruled unchallenged for generations. But their rise was steady, relentless, and eventually unstoppable. Historians still argue whether the shift from herbs to hops was purely about preservation or if monastic brewers simply preferred the new bitterness that hops introduced. Some records suggest that certain abbeys resisted the change for decades, clinging stubbornly to traditional recipes passed down through generations. Others embraced hops eagerly, recognizing their ability to extend the shelf life of beer, a crucial advantage in an era when storage was difficult and spoilage common. Either way, by the time the Middle Ages drew to a close, hops had won. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern beer enthusiasts raise an eyebrow. Some medieval breweries didn't just use hops for flavor. They also believed the plant had medicinal properties, claiming it could aid digestion, soothe headaches, and even ward off melancholy. Whether these claims held any real merit is debatable, but the monks weren't entirely wrong. Hops do contain compounds with mild sedative effects, which might explain why a warm mug of hopped beer felt so comforting after a long day of prayer and labor. Back at the table, the argument continues. Brother Anselm gestures toward a stack of wax-sealed barrels near the far wall. "These are stronger," he says. "They'll last through winter. Without hops, we'd lose half our stock before spring." The older monk scoffs. "And with hops, we lose something else. Flavor, tradition." He sets his cup down with finality. "I'll stick with what I know." You take another sip of your own drink, letting the flavor settle on your tongue. The bitterness is unmistakable, clean, resinous, almost floral, but it lingers in a way that feels oddly satisfying. It's different from the herbal brews you've tasted before, sharper, more assertive. And yet, there's something undeniably appealing about it. Outside, the bells toll again, signaling yet another round of prayers. But here in the refectory, the discussion isn't finished. Monks continue to debate, voices rising and falling like the bubbling wort in the brewery next door. Some swear by hops, others cling to the old ways, and a few seem content to enjoy both depending on the season. You glance around, noting how divided the room is. Half the brothers reach instinctively for the hopped ale, while the other half pour themselves cups of the traditional herbal blend. There's no clear winner here. Only preference, only habit, only the slow, inevitable march of change. As you set your cup down beside your bowl, you realize something important. Revolutions don't always come with fire and sword. Sometimes they arrive quietly, tucked inside a handful of dried cones, carried into history by men who simply wanted their beer to last a little longer. And so the debate continues. The monastery is quiet tonight, too quiet. The bells still hang in the tower, but they haven't rung in days. The chapel remains open, yet no voices rise in prayer beneath its vaulted ceiling. Candles flicker in iron sconces, casting long shadows across empty pews and cold stone floors. This place, once alive with devotion and brewing, now feels like a tomb. You step carefully through the cloister, your boots echoing against the worn flagstones. Brother Anselm walks beside you, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly before him. He doesn't speak. There's nothing left to say. The dissolution has come. It began slowly at first. Whispers of royal decrees, rumors of distant abbeys shuddered overnight. But now it is here, sweeping through England like a winter wind, tearing down centuries of tradition with the stroke of a quill. King Henry VIII has broken from Rome, declaring himself head of the Church of England, and with that break comes a purge. Monasteries are being disbanded, their lands seized, their treasures stripped away, and with them, their breweries. Historians still argue whether the dissolution of the monasteries was purely political or if economic motives played a larger role than officially admitted. Some records suggest that Henry saw monastic wealth as an opportunity, a way to refill the royal coffers by seizing land, gold, and assets. Others imply that the king genuinely believed religious houses had become corrupt, too powerful, too resistant to reform. Either way, one thing is certain. When the monks were driven out, beer lost one of its greatest champions. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern beer lovers shudder. Some of the last surviving monastic breweries weren't shut down entirely. Instead, they were bought by wealthy nobles who continued brewing under new ownership, keeping the recipes alive even as the monks who created them were cast aside. Yes, really. In some cases, former abbey brewers were hired by aristocrats simply because they knew how to make good beer, and because nobody else could replicate their methods. Back in the monastery, the signs of abandonment are everywhere. Barrels sit half-filled in the brew house, their lids sealed but forgotten. Sacks of malted barley remain stacked in the granary, untouched and slowly gathering dust. Even the mashed tun bears the faint scent of hops and grain, though no fire warms it anymore. It's as if the building itself remembers what it once was, mourning the loss of something sacred. Brother Anselm stops near the doorway of the brewery, running his fingers along the wooden frame. His voice is barely above a whisper. "We brewed here for generations," he says. "Now it will be sold, or torn down." You glance around, picturing the men who once worked here, The monks who stirred the wort, measured the herbs, and poured their faith into every batch. They were not just brewers. They were historians, scientists, caretakers of a tradition older than most kingdoms. And now they're gone. Outside, the sky is darkening, streaked with hues of gray and violet. A cold wind cuts through the courtyard, rattling the loose hinges of the gatehouse door. You follow Brother Anselm toward the edge of the property, where the fields stretch wide and unbroken beneath the fading light. Somewhere beyond those hills, other monasteries face the same fate. Some have already fallen. Others cling desperately to survival, hoping against hope that this storm will pass them by. But history does not pause for prayers. The monks may be leaving, but their legacy lingers, in the recipes passed down to lay brewers, in the traditions carried forward by tavern keepers, in the very fabric of European beer culture. Even as monasteries crumble, their influence remains. And perhaps in time it will rise again. You stand at the edge of history, a modern drinker in a world far removed from candlelit monasteries and stone-walled breweries. Yet, as you lift your glass, whether it's filled with a crisp pilsner, a rich abbey ale, or something boldly hopped, you're holding more than just beer. You're holding centuries of tradition, of trial and error, of monks who brewed not for profit, but for survival, for faith, for sustenance through long nights of prayer. The legacy of medieval brewing never truly vanished. It simply changed hands. When the monasteries fell, their recipes didn't disappear. They were passed down, whispered from one generation of brewers to the next. Some found new homes in noble households, others in bustling city taverns where merchants and travelers clinked wooden mugs in celebration. And still others survived in hidden corners of Europe, where Trappist monks quietly continued their craft, refining techniques that would one day give rise to some of the world's most revered beers. Historians still argue whether modern brewing owes more to the monks or to secular brewers who rose after the Dissolution. Some suggest that monastic influence waned entirely by the 17th century, while others point to the continued use of old brewing methods in traditional European Alesh. Either way, one thing is certain. Without those early monks, beer as we know it might not exist. They gave us more than just recipes. They gave us structure, discipline, and an understanding of fermentation that laid the groundwork for every brewery that followed. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your mind, one that would make modern beer enthusiasts raise an eyebrow. Some of today's most famous Belgian and German breweries trace their roots directly back to medieval monasteries. The Trappists, in particular, are still active, producing limited-run Alesh under strict guidelines that mirror those of their ancestors. In fact, if you've ever had a Westville Trin 12 or a Chimay Blue, you've tasted history itself. Beer brewed using techniques nearly unchanged since the Middle Ages. Back in your own time, you glance around at the bar or kitchen or wherever you happen to be reading this, imagining how different life must have been for those medieval brewers. No refrigeration, no pasteurization, no standardized yeast strains, just careful observation, intuition, and a deep respect for the process. They worked by feel, by smell, by taste, trusting instincts honed over generations. And yet, despite all the technological advances we now take for granted, the heart of brewing remains the same. Beer is still about community, still about nourishment, still about bringing people together, whether in a monastery refectory or a crowded pub. You take another sip, letting the flavors unfold on your tongue. Maybe it's hoppy and sharp, like the debates between monks over grut versus hops. Maybe it's malty and smooth, reminiscent of the daily rations that kept brothers awake through endless vigils. Or maybe it's something spiced, something herbal, something that carries echoes of both convent gardens and pilgrimage roads. Whatever it is, it connects you to them, to the men and women who first saw beer not just as drink, but as duty, as art, as something sacred. Outside, the night stretches wide and deep, much like the ones those monks once watched pass beneath cathedral windows. The bells don't ring here, but perhaps somewhere in the quiet hum of the world, you can still hear the distant echo of wooden ladles stirring mash tuns, of casks resting in cool cellars, of prayers spoken over bubbling fermentations. Because history doesn't end when the last monk leaves a monastery. It lives on in every sip you take. The world slows now, the weight of history settling gently around you like a warm woolen blanket. The monastery fades into memory, its stone walls dissolving into the quiet hum of your own time. The bells no longer ring. The monks no longer stir their bubbling cauldrons beneath flickering oil lamps. But the echoes remain soft, distant, like the fading notes of a lullaby sung long ago. You exhale slowly, feeling the warmth of the story settle in your chest. It's easy to forget how deeply rooted beer is in human history, not just as a drink, but as a companion to prayer, to labor, to survival itself. The monks brewed not for indulgence, but for necessity, for warmth, for strength, for something to keep them going through the long, silent hours of the night. And somehow, across centuries and continents, that same spirit endures. Outside, if you're listening closely, you might hear the faint whisper of wind through trees, or the rhythmic ticking of a clock marking time somewhere beyond the veil of sleep. Inside, the air feels still, heavy with drowsiness, wrapped in the hush of a world winding down. You take another slow sip from your glass, if you still have one, or simply close your eyes and imagine it. Cool glass in your hand, the scent of malt and hops rising gently into the air. You let the taste linger, savoring not just the flavor, but the journey that brought it to you. Every batch, every barrel, every whispered recipe passed from brother to brother, it all led here, to this moment, to you. And now the fire burns low. The pages of history are closed, at least for tonight. The monks have gone to bed. The breweries stand silent, and the road between monasteries stretches empty beneath the stars. There will be more stories tomorrow, more journeys to take, more histories to uncover. But for now, there is only peace. So raise your glass one last time, not just to beer, but to the hands that first brewed it, to the men and women who saw magic in fermentation, who found solace in a wooden cup, who kept faith alive with every careful step through candlelit halls. Then set the glass down, tuck yourself in, let the silence wrap around you like a soft, familiar hymn, and drift gently into sleep.
you.